I never thought my own daughter would be the one to look me in the eye and hand me a death sentence. But there she was, smiling while she pushed a bowl of steaming soup toward me. I saw it all through the reflection in the microwave door. Her shaking hands, the small vial she tucked into her sleeve, and that cold, calculated look on her face that I didn't recognize. Was I wrong for what I did next, or would you have done the exact same thing to save your own life? I need you to listen to this carefully because by the end, you're going to have to tell me if I'm a monster for the way I handled my own flesh and blood. It all started about 6 months ago when my husband, David, passed away quite suddenly, leaving me the sole owner of our family estate and a very substantial life insurance policy. My daughter, Chloe, had always been a bit of a firebrand, but after her father died, she changed into someone I barely knew. She was constantly hounding me about the inheritance, asking why I hadn't set up her trust fund yet, or why I was hoarding the money when she had debts to pay. I tried to explain that I was just following David's wishes, to wait until she was 25 so she'd be more responsible, but she didn't want to hear it. She moved back into the house 3 weeks ago, claiming she wanted to take care of me and my grief, but the atmosphere was thick with tension from the moment she stepped through the door. I wanted to believe her, I really did, because a mother's heart is designed to overlook the flaws in her child. We spent the first week in a weird sort of domestic bliss that felt entirely staged. She'd make me tea, she'd ask about my day, and then, inevitably, the conversation would pivot back to the money. She'd mention a huge investment opportunity, or how her car was on its last legs. I kept saying no, and I watched her eyes grow harder with every refusal. I remember one night specifically we were sitting on the porch, and the silence was so heavy it felt like it was crushing my chest. She was staring at the sprawling garden David had spent decades tending, and she didn't see the beauty in it. She saw dollar signs. She whispered, almost to herself, that selling the land would solve every problem she ever had. I looked at her profile in the moonlight, seeing the sharp line of her jaw and the way she gripped her glass of wine. And for a fleeting second, I saw a stranger. I tried to reach out, to touch her hand and tell her that we still had each other, but she pulled away, claiming she had a headache and needed to go to bed. That was the night the caring daughter routine really intensified, becoming almost suffocating in its forced affection. She began insisting on handling all the grocery shopping, all the cooking, and even the management of my daily vitamins. Then the health issues started. I began feeling dizzy. My vision would blur after dinner, and I had these strange heart palpitations that the doctor couldn't quite explain. I thought it was just the stress of losing David. But then I started noticing things around the house. The smell of something metallic in my morning coffee, or a bitter aftertaste in the water she brought to my bedside. I even found a small smudge of white powder on the rim of my favorite mug one morning. I tried to convince myself it was just sugar or perhaps some dust, but deep down, the primal part of my brain was screaming that I was in danger. I started secretly pouring my drinks into the potted plants when she wasn't looking, and wouldn't you know it, within 3 days, my prize-winning ferns began to wither and turn a sickly yellow. I stood over those dying plants and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. My mind began to race through every interaction we'd had over the last 2 weeks. Was it the pancakes on Tuesday? The herbal tea on Wednesday? I felt like a prisoner in my own home, playing a deadly game of chess where I didn't even know the rules. That was the moment the denial died. I didn't want to believe my daughter was capable of hurting me, but the evidence was dying right there in the living room. Yesterday, I decided to be vigilant. I pretended to be engrossed in a magazine, while she was in the kitchen preparing her special vegetable soup. I moved toward the kitchen to get a napkin, but I stopped just short of the door when I saw her reflection. She didn't see me. She was leaning over my bowl, her face contorted in a mask of pure desperation, emptying a clear liquid from a tiny glass bottle into the broth. She stirred it in quickly, her breath coming in short, jagged gasps, and then she dumped the bottle into the deep trash under the sink, covering it with vegetable scraps so it wouldn't be found. I watched her wipe her brow and take a deep, shaky breath, as if she were mentally preparing for a performance. My heart felt like it was being squeezed by a cold hand. I retreated silently to the dining room table, my legs feeling like lead, and I sat there, trying to keep my breathing steady when she walked in a moment later, beaming with that fake, saccharine smile. "Here you go, Mom. she said, her voice trembling just a fraction. Eat up while it's hot. It'll make you feel so much better. I looked down at the soup, and for a second, I felt like I was going to vomit. This was the girl I raised, the girl I stayed up with through every fever and every heartbreak, and now she was watching me like a hawk, waiting for me to take a sip of what I was certain was poison. I looked at her, then back at the soup, and I realized I had to make a choice. So that's the situation I was in. Trapped in my own home with a daughter who wanted me gone for a paycheck. And I had to decide right then and there how this story was going to end. Before I tell you how I handled the switch and the absolute chaos that followed, I want you to pause right now and comment below. What would you have done? Would you have called the police right then, or would you have done what I did? I needed to know for sure. I needed her to face the reality of what she was doing. I looked up at her and sighed, clutching my stomach. Oh, Chloe, I forgot the sourdough bread in the oven. Could you grab it for me? My hip is acting up again. She hesitated for a split second, her eyes darting to my bowl. But she nodded and hurried into the kitchen. The second her back was turned, I moved with a speed I didn't know I still possessed. I swapped our bowls perfectly, making sure the garnish looked identical. By the time she walked back in with the bread, I was sitting there, looking exhausted and frail. Thanks, honey, I whispered. She sat down opposite me and picked up her spoon. I watched her, my heart hammering against my ribs, as she took a large, confident gulp of the soup I was supposed to be eating. She looked at me, waiting for me to eat mine. I took a tiny spoonful of the clean soup and pretended to swallow. We sat there in silence for 10 minutes. I talked about her father, about how much he loved her, trying to give her one last chance to confess, one last chance to take it back. I told her stories about when she was a baby, about how David used to say she was the best thing that ever happened to us. I reminded her of the time she fell off her bike, and he carried her 2 miles home, crying more than she was. I looked for a flicker of guilt, a tear, anything. But she just nodded, her eyes cold and distant, looking at her watch as if she were timing my final moments. I could see her jaw clenching as I spoke, as if my memories were an annoyance she had to endure before she could claim her prize. It was the most heartbreaking 10 minutes of my life. I realized that the daughter I loved was already gone. She had been replaced by this creature of pure avarice. And then it happened. Chloe's face suddenly went pale. She dropped her spoon, and it clattered against the porcelain with a sound like a gunshot in the quiet room. She clutched her throat, her eyes widening as she realized something was horribly wrong. "Mom," she gasped, her voice coming out as a raspy whisper. I don't feel good. My chest. It feels like it's on fire." I didn't move. I didn't jump up to help her. I just sat there, looking at her with a clarity that felt like ice water in my veins. "Is it the soup, Chloe?" I asked, my voice completely flat and devoid of the warmth she was used to. Her head snapped up, and the realization hit her. She looked at my bowl, then hers, and the terror that crossed her face was something I will never forget. It wasn't just physical pain. It was the realization that she had been outplayed by the woman she thought was a weak-old fool. You switched them?" she choked out, falling from her chair, and onto the hardwood floor. I stood up slowly, walked around the table, and looked down at her. "I saw you, Chloe. I saw you in the reflection. I wanted to believe I was wrong, I prayed I was wrong, but you ate that soup without a second thought because you knew exactly what was in mine." She was gasping now, her skin turning a sickly shade of gray, clawing at the floorboards. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I didn't call 911 immediately. I made her listen to me first. I told her that I had changed my will that morning. Not that she'd live to see it anyway. I told her that David would be disgusted by what she had become. I watched as the panic set in, her eyes darting around the room, looking for an exit that didn't exist. "Help me," she managed to squeak out, but I just stood there. I wanted her to feel exactly what she had intended for me to feel. The isolation, the betrayal, the sudden realization that your life is slipping away because of someone you trusted. I waited until her breathing became shallow, until the fight finally left her eyes. I took a seat on the chair next to her, and watched the clock. 5 minutes passed. Then 7. I wanted the image of her betrayal to be burned into her mind forever. I told her that money doesn't buy peace, And it certainly doesn't buy a mother's forgiveness. Only when she was on the verge of passing out did I finally call the paramedics. I told them she must have had an allergic reaction or accidentally ingested something while cooking. When they arrived, they found the vial in the trash. I had made sure to point them toward the leak, under the sink while they were stabilizing her. I acted the part of the hysterical, grieving mother perfectly, clutching my chest and sobbing as they wheeled her out. It turned out she had been using a concentrated dose of a heart medication that wasn't hers, something that would have looked like a natural heart attack for an older woman like me. She survived, but the damage to her heart was permanent. She'll never run again. She'll never even climb a flight of stairs without gasping for air. The police found her fingerprints all over that vial, and they found a digital search history on her laptop for untraceable poisons, and how to accelerate cardiac arrest. They also found evidence of her massive gambling debts, and a series of angry emails from creditors. She's currently awaiting trial from a hospital bed in the prison ward, facing charges of attempted murder. The trial is scheduled for next month, and my lawyer says it's an open and shut case. But the legal battle is nothing compared to the war inside my head. My family thinks I'm a hero for surviving, but they don't know the full truth. They don't know I watched her suffer for those 10 minutes before calling for help. They don't know that I felt a strange sense of peace as I watched her struggle. They don't know that I had already prepared the evidence for the police before I even sat down to eat. My sisters call me every day, telling me how lucky I am that Chloe accidentally poisoned herself while trying to cook for me. They think she's just a troubled girl who made a mistake. I let them believe it. It's easier that way than explaining that I raised a killer. I've started seeing a therapist to deal with the trauma. But how do you tell a stranger that you feel more relief than grief? I'm living in the big house alone now, and the silence is finally peaceful, though sometimes at night, I still hear the sound of that spoon hitting the bowl. I've rearranged every room, getting rid of the furniture she used and the dishes we shared. I sold the land she wanted so badly and donated the money to a charity for victims of elder abuse. I think David would have liked that. He always believed in justice, and in a way, justice was served in that dining room. It was a hard lesson to learn, but I realized that blood doesn't always mean loyalty, and sometimes the person you'd take a bullet for is the one pulling the trigger. I spent so many years protecting her from the world, and in the end, I had to protect myself from her. I've started a garden of my own now, far away from the ferns she killed, and I find a strange comfort in watching things grow without interference. I did what I had to do to survive, and I don't regret it for a single second. I've realized that being a mother doesn't mean being a doormat, and sometimes, the greatest act of love is showing your child the consequences of their own darkness. I hope that one day, in that prison hospital, she realizes that the person who truly took care of her was the mother she tried to destroy. Like this video if you think I was right to switch the plates and protect myself from her greed. Subscribe for more stories where the truth is stranger than fiction. And please share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. Did I go too far by letting her feel the effects of her own poison? Or was it the only way to make her understand the gravity of her choice? I'll see you all in the next story.